Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Construct Innovate webinar series, Innovation and Entrepreneurship. This is our last session in this module. I'm Kasia Heffernan. I'm a Construct Innovate Marketing and Communication Officer, and I will be hosting this webinar today. Construct Innovate is Ireland's national research centre for construction and technology and innovation. We have today breaking the silos as our main theme of the presentations. This is the last session, and we have excellent speakers for today. So Martin Ryan, co-founder, principal of Think Actionable, John Cleere, founder of Unmake, Emily Orlik, strategy and innovation manager from Share Partners. So if Martin wouldn't mind to share his presentation.
Sure. Yeah, happy to jump in. Okay, let me share my slides. Yeah, hopefully, can you see that okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Great. Okay, I'll jump in. I'm quite slide heavy, but I'm going to try and move through them pretty quick. So I'm going to stick a timer on for myself. Yeah, what I'd like to introduce you to is human-centered design, or how a user-centered design approach might be useful, and to try and provoke some thinking in the construction sector. And that's my background, I suppose. It's user-centered design. And what I'd like you to think about is, where do you think the opportunities for innovation in construction are? So if we pause for a minute, everybody on the line are probably going to be thinking of different things. But I think a more relevant question is really, where are the problems in construction? Because opportunities for innovation starts to bring people to think of the fabric, materials, technologies, but actually there's a much wider set of problems that presents a challenge for construction. So what are the problems in construction? Because I believe necessity is the mother of all invention, and a problem is just a root source issue of a need or an unmet need. This is just a snapshot of a productivity index across sectors from 2017. So it's going back a little bit from McKinsey, but it effectively indicates that the construction sector is about 50% productivity of many other sectors, including general productivity of industry, and manufacturing. It's relatively it's lower. And what they say areas to tackle are around collaborating, contracting, procurement, supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. It's often a human system issue, which can often be underpinned by communication problems, lack of clarity around the requirements, stakeholder misalignment, and so on. So this is actually relevant to lots of sectors, but can be an overlooked space when it comes to opportunities for innovation. And what's interesting is, most attention and most activity when it comes to innovation is given around product, around, like I say, a material output, a physical output. But there's back in 2013 and before that in 1998, Dublin and Larry Keeley coined the term 10 types of innovation, which set a framework to say, actually, there's a range of different ways we can bring innovation to a sector, and the most successful companies bring a combination of innovations, whether it's around the business model, etc. So that's what I want to think around the service, around the process of how we deliver our products and our solutions. My own background is I was approximately 14 years in Maynooth University as a lecturer and a program director for design topics, design innovation topics. But I practice what I preach, and I've had this entrepreneurial journey over a long time as well, which has led to an equestrian saddle, which is disruptive in its sector. So I'm going to allude a little bit to that. Um, but in terms of some work that starts to cross over maybe with aspects of construction, so I have done some work with Glenveagh, and that's around looking at home buying of the future and how. So it's kind of big picture stuff around healthcare. Do a lot of stuff in healthcare, and often elements of how the service and the infrastructure combine can present challenges. So in particular, the example there is around Mount, which is the one of the big hospitals, rehab hospitals in the country. And then around, like I say, disrupting a very traditional sector through this human-centered approach in the equestrian space. And what some of you might have heard of is a methodology called design thinking. So design thinking is one example of a human-centered design process. This is the double diamond, which comes from originated out of Stanford. And what it's really looks at is it breaks every challenge into two spaces, a solution space on the right and a problem space on the left. A lot of people prematurely go into a solution space. Somebody asks them to solve this, they go straight into ideating. Whereas design thinking is a way to try and first paint a clearer picture of that problem through empathy work, and really clarify the problem and the context of the problem before we go into the solution space. And it's quite an efficient way of doing that. Now, as you can imagine, there's a bit to that process. So I'm just going to cherry pick three kind of big steps and just quickly introduce you. And it's really building insight through empathy work. Then important consideration of how we define and clarify the problem now that we've done that work. And then this process of enlightened trial and error. So the big value add in a human-centered design approach, in the design thinking approach, is techniques to really insightfully understand the problem space. If we just ask people what they need and want and rely on that can tell us some things, but people express their problems using the terms of the existing solution. So if Henry Ford asked people what they'd wanted, they'd have said a faster horse because they knew the horse was the affordable mode of transport. Whereas we need to get beyond that, we need to get to the unmet needs, the needs that people don't express that well, which in this case is really what's behind the faster horse is an affordable, cost-effective, and available, mode of transport. In his case, obviously, it was the first kind of affordable mass-produced car. And going and observing, not just relying on conversation and interviews, but seeing the context of the situation is absolutely crucial. If I say to you, what is this? What's it do? You'd say, well, simply what it is, screwdriver, what it does. But if we look at that in different contexts, to a painter, it's a tin opener. To a criminal, it might be a weapon or a means of entry. And they're using it to solve different needs that they have. So that in construction, and in any sector, we need to understand and really understand the context of why communication breaks down, or even if we're producing a new material solution, it's what is the context of it that it's being applied, and not just the kind of technology side of it and the science side of it. And so, like, this is an example. Regulation came in over a decade ago in the UK. All lighting had to be replaced with fire-rated lighting to stop, fires traveling up through commercial buildings and so on. And when we asked a large contractor what would they need from solutions in that area, again, it was hard for them to express. But when we asked them to show how you go about installing a light fitting, we started to observe and see a lot of things became quite interesting and obvious. And some of the things were things like where people adapt and improvise aspects of their process that they didn't express to solve their own problems. So we call that lead user advantage. So that's where you've got, somebody drilling out lights creates dust. He emptied out a box of screws, improvised the cover of the box of screws, and to use it to catch dust. There was things like when he looked through his toolbox, he realized he didn't have the right hole saw size. So then he verbalized, because we prompted him, that that would change how he's priced this project, because now he has to either go out and buy a new piece of equipment or go back home and collect it, and it changes the time. So these are real scenarios in context that we're faced with. And when we start to do this empathy work, you start to understand the needs of a sector, and you can change the business model or other aspects through innovation to better serve that. And so Hilti, changed to a service model or a fleet management model because they started to recognize that tools get stolen, they arrive damaged, and there's a whole lot of complications and hassle when the company just needs reliable, tools on site when they need it. And so they changed it that you would pay a service model and you collect the tools on the day, guaranteed that they'd be working. You can then, reliably deliver the service that you had priced for, and so on. And that became important to people. The second point is uh, problem. You do that work, you can lose that work quickly in insight if you don't write it up or clarify it in the right way. And so this is a kind of prolific inventor of his era. Problem well stated is a problem half solved. How we state it is really important. This is Jonathan Ives. He was effectively the second most important person in Apple through the Steve Jobs era, thought to have been a real proponent behind the iPod, iPhone, and so on. This is him on BBC talking about how he would tackle a problem that was set to the kids to design a lunchbox and school bag of the future. I think it's quite interesting. Just a short
We set a
bit.
challenge, and the challenge was to design a lunchbox, a school bag, and a pencil case all in one. So imagine that was your brief. If you were given that task, how would you have approached it?
If we're thinking of lunchbox, we'd be really careful about not having the word box already, give you a bunch of ideas that could be quite narrow, because you think of a box as being square and like a cube. And so we're quite careful with the words we use, because those can sort of determine the path that you go down.
Sure.
And so that kind of careful narrative, like using an existing way of solving the problem in the way you describe it, leads people to think in that same way. But as Theodore Levitt said, before him, in this what we call outcome-driven innovation, what's the outcome people are trying to achieve? People don't want a quarter-inch drill; they want a quarter-inch hole. So we have to be just really careful in describing the outcome they're trying to achieve, and not the current way of getting to that outcome. And then finally, we do this work, insight work, empathy, observations. We capture it appropriately to lead people to the value proposition that's important to them. But then we need to, it's still risky. We have to test the solutions, and we have to make the intangible solutions tangible. And we do that through a process of enlightened trial and error. So I'm just going back to the saddle example, in this case, which was I had never designed a saddle before, and it was well received international markets at Elite Sports, and I was one of the top selling saddles for Steuben around the world. I've licensed it on there. And what the first insight of that was really appraising what is a saddle trying to do between a horse and a ride him. It's a medium that needs to be flexible. If we removed it, you can see there's a lot of dynamic movement going on. So an insight, saddles need to be dynamic, the structure, the mechanism, not static and just padded. This was my first solution. So you can see it's that launched to the market. It's got this sort of natural suspension system that can flex with the horse's back, freedom of movement through free biomechanics. This was the first prototype. So this was about 6 weeks into the project. This is what I'm talking about, enlightened trial and error. It's this like, what is the minimal viable, tangible way to represent it? And you can do this in services as well. But to quickly communicate with relevant stakeholders to get that feedback. And then this was maybe 4 weeks later again, chicken mesh using fiberglass to just rudimentarily create something that could be tested. And then going through, iterative cycles, enlightened trial and error cycles before you get to the expensive validation testing or scientific validation, which can cost thousands and tens of thousands of euro. And so this principle, which comes from design thinking and human-centered design, is this idea: instead of going for a flawless planning route, which a lot of my competitors would do, and some of them who were arriving at a similar solution had spent well over £1 million developing it. This my solution was launched to market after 200,000 spend. So it was significantly cheaper, and it was with this kind of quick iterative rather than sort of a lab-based, not putting out solutions for that kind of early failure test. And so we want to fail fast and learn fast. And so, yeah, just to reflect on, I suppose, a couple of things. I think a human-centered design, because construction is no different to any other sector. It's made up of humans and systems and processes and interactions. We need to understand them in context, and empathy work can work really well there. We need to carefully clarify what they're trying to achieve at any of those kind of tasks or jobs they're trying to do. And then that'll give us, by capturing that appropriately, gives us opportunity to be more innovative in our solution and more relevant. And then it's this process of kind of rapid iterative testing through enlightened trial and error. And that's it. Thank you. Yeah, 16 seconds first. Sorry. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. That's an excellent presentation. And it kind of comes to mind what Adobe says when you first start dealing with Adobe. And Adobe is extremely beautiful software for making graphic design, but it's also used by marketing people. And advertisement says, remember what who you're selling to and what you're selling for. Like, so if you're selling mattresses, is for a good night's sleep. Is not the mattress that you should be describing. You should be appealing to people's needs and what they want from your product. So it is very important to get that human aspect in the innovation at the very beginning. And I think that you capture it very well. And the communication part, I think it's where we really need to innovate when it comes to construction as well. I think the whole year of those webinars, I think most of the presentation mentioned that as well, how we communicate, how we analyze the data, how we see the construction, how we collect, how we share what we know. It's very important. I think it's all the part of the communication and the human aspect in it.
Yeah, and because you see quite a bit that people do lovely work and they get insights, but then they get nervous in writing it up to be describing something that feels quite different to how everybody else describes the problem. And they regress back to the way everyone describes the issue. And before you know it, they're just doing the same thing. So you're totally right. How that's captured and documented and communicated is really important at that moment to not undo good work.
Yes, thank you so much. We will talk some more in Q&As. Will we have John Cleere from Unmake, founder of Unmake, presenting now? Would be great. Oh, we can. I was just worried that
we're all good?
Yes, the internet's working. Great. Thank you,
Okay,
John.
great.
I'll just give you the stage now.
Okay, thanks, Kasia. So, from my own end, really, when we're talking about breaking silos, most organizations that I speak to, they tend to say kind of the same thing. We need to break silos. We need more collaboration. We need more alignment. But I think if we're all honest about it, we've been kind of saying that for years. So this talk is about looking slightly upstream of the usual answers. And it's about asking where silos actually form before they harden into everyday behaviors. So just a bit of quick context about myself. I spent about 25 years working across design mainly, facilitation and strategy. More recently, my work has focused on helping organizations turn what they already know into something that actually drives growth and innovation. And that often includes new ideas, but more importantly, it's about making better use of the knowledge that's already inside the organization and getting that to move. And I also run Tech Thursday, which is an industry-led community of business and talent, where we have online and in-person events. And all these events are based around what they actually want to see and hear and collaborate on. And I suppose what we do is we kind of keep focusing on the same things when we're talking about silos, but nothing really changes. And I think it's not reorganization when we talk about silos. I think we can move structures around and still keep the same misunderstandings. It's not a checklist, because alignment is something that you don't complete once. And it's not another slogan about breaking silos. We've had those for years, and the issue isn't really about structure, it's what's happening underneath. So I think we all have them in our own organizations. We've built systems around collaboration. We have meetings, dashboards, updates, channels, Slack channels, etc. And yet, I think most people would rather do almost anything else than attend another bloody meeting. So, and I think COVID kind of brought that on as well. So there was a survey that found that most people would rather actually sit in traffic or even do jury duty than attend another meeting. So I think the real question is, if meetings are where collaboration is supposed to happen, why do they so often reinforce silos instead of actually building shared understanding with people? So I think part of the problem is how we define silos. We think them as structures, departments, reporting lines, but that's not actually where they live. I think they show up in the language that we use and the assumptions we make about framing problems. And sometimes they're in things that people are afraid to actually say. So the silos isn't always structural. Sometimes it's actually conversational. It's about language and fear. And we'll just look at language and fear now. So the language pattern, we bring teams together, and sometimes it often becomes very clear that you might be solving the same problem. And that's because they're usually using the same words but meaning completely different things. So words like customer value, innovation, efficiency, strategy, productivity. But underneath, we're all working in parallel silos. And the moment you surface that, progress begins to accelerate almost immediately. And there's something, and then I suppose, in terms of the fear then as well, there's something else that we don't really talk about with regard to fear. And especially today, I suppose, when we have things like, we bring on more of this fear is AI, change, uncertainty. But fear isn't just resistance in teams, it's information. And it's often the canary in the coal mine. It's telling you something important is happening, but something that I suppose that hasn't really been fully understood yet. And if there's no space to say that, it tends to stay hidden, and silos grow and harden around that. So what can you do about it? Well, there's a painting by Raphael called The School of Athens, way back in the 16th century. And it shows all the great thinkers of different disciplines all under one roof in one time. Plato, Aristotle, I should say, Pythagoras, all these different people. But what's interesting isn't just who they are. And if you look at the painting, it's about what's happening. They're all sharing ideas across boundaries under one roof. And that's what the Renaissance actually was back then. It's about sharing new knowledge. So I think the question really is, how often do we create the spaces like that inside our own organizations? So what I'm getting at here is that silos don't form at the end of a process, they form at the beginning. I think what we do is we jump into solving before we build kind of shared understanding. So different teams end up solving maybe slightly different versions of the same problem. And by the time to come together, those perspectives can be hardened and locked in. And I think that most improvements programs start once we think we know the problem. But if you go slightly upstream from that, before that point, I think that's where the real leverage is, because that's where silos haven't hardened yet. So it's about it's not necessarily about slowing things down at this point, it's about preventing loads of wasted time later. So a lot of collaboration spaces are built around consumption. So we have things like updates, reporting, presentations, or perhaps someone blabbering on about silos. So basically, it's information flowing one way. But silos don't really break through consumption. They break through using contribution, through people thinking together, not just listening together. And that difference sounds small maybe, but it completely changes the energy in the room and how an organization communicates with each other. And just to make this real, I was working with TG Carter on one of their teams with regard to a strategy challenge. We brought people from different parts of the organization into the same space. not to report, but to actually, I suppose, think through the problem together. And at one point, we actually hit a complete dead end. And the insight came actually from an intern. And it wasn't because they had more experience. It was because, I suppose, they weren't really locked into the same assumptions that the team had. And that moment only happened because the space allowed that to happen. And that kind of moment doesn't show up in, status meetings where people are just presenting. So it's not the workshop itself that matters. It's really whether people can actually contribute in these kind of meetings. And there's abundance of talent out there, and that's something I see everywhere now. It's absolutely an absolute abundance of talent out there, and even inside your own organization. And organizations don't fail from a lack of talent; they fail when knowledge actually gets stuck. And we see this everywhere. And Gallup had a report recently that said about only 20% of employees globally are actually engaged. And Forbes often brings out documents and it says or suggestions that the vast majority of employees don't really understand their company's strategy. So these aren't really separate issues. They're symptoms really of the same problem. And that problem is that knowledge is not moving. But when knowledge does start to move, things can change quite quickly. And when we're working with clients, they often describe it with these same kind of quotes and things like they felt a shared sense of ownership, or we aligned in hours instead of weeks. And another said, so much could be achieved in so little time with clear next steps. And that kind of matters because this isn't just about solving one problem. It's about stronger networks across teams. It's about faster problem solving, shared insights, and more ownership. And with regard to retaining talent, like I was saying earlier on, people stay actually where they feel that they're learning, and more importantly, where they feel that they're contributing. So we now talk about AI, and we talk about AI nearly as much as we talk about air fryers. But I suppose my summary of AI would be that it speeds up execution. Just very straightforward explanation of it. Speeds up execution. But I think what it really gives us is more time upstream. It's more time to think together, more time to build shared understanding, and more time to build relationships. Because I think your best people don't leave because of tools. They leave you when they don't feel heard or connected. And when they leave, they take all of that knowledge with them. So the opportunity with AI is not just faster execution. I think it's the space for better shared judgment in your teams. So the goal is not to solve everything in one go. It's to surface assumptions, create shared understanding, and build momentum. Because I suppose once people are actually solving the same problem, execution becomes much easier. And in a world shaped by, well, ever so increasingly shaped by AI and constant change, those upstream kind of human skills become more valuable. Things like clarity, judgment, resilience, shared thinking. And these are also the kind of capabilities increasingly echoed in the World Economic Forum's report, the Future Jobs Report 2030. It's worth having a look at because they really focus in on how you get your teams working on clarity, judgment, resilience, and shared thinking. So some of the thinking has started to shape how we work as well and how we're dealing with organizations. And as an example, lean and operational improvements, which I suppose some of you guys in construction can relate to. And one of the things we realized quite quickly was that many things are being introduced to optimization before they've actually built shared understanding. So even with a good lean program, silos can be already hardened underneath that surface. Different assumptions, different definitions of the same problem, different priorities. So what emerged from the upstream thinking was something that we've started to call lean without the lecture. And the idea is quite deliberate, really, and it's quite simple. It's before these kind of heavy methodologies, before large transformation programs, before lots of heavy training. What we do is we bring small groups together first to manage expectations, really important, manage expectations, make work visible, surface friction, and equally important, identify quick wins and create some kind of shared understanding around what improvements are actually needed. So it's not months of this kind of lean theory. It's not 50 slide deck presentations. It's not endless workshops. It's just practical sessions that help teams hit the ground running. And what's interesting is that once people feel involved in shaping the problem, the improvement work and the lean programs become much easier and much more enjoyable afterwards. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, it's not a big transformation program. It could be something really simple. For example, you could bring 4 or 5 people from different parts of the organization into a room, not to report, etc., but to make sense of a problem together before solutions are defined, I should say. So no slides, no updates, no hierarchy, just shared thinking. And that's typically where I work now. It's right at that point, upstream, before the assumptions harden. So what you're looking for in these situations is, can people contribute? Can they speak honestly? Can they make sense together? Because when that happens, it's really important. The big thing that really happens here is that hidden know-how becomes shared intelligence. And that's where alignment actually really begins in organizations. So maybe the question really isn't, how do we break the silos? I think maybe the question is, how do we create environments where they don't harden in the first place? Because in the world of rapid change and AI, I think the real difference won't be just who has the best tools. It's going to be between organizations where knowledge moves and the ones where it gets stuck. So that's less consumption, more contribution, and maybe a little bit more, I suppose, unexpected innovation and ideas and opportunities, which are some of the biggest outcomes from this upstream thinking as well. And just to leave you guys with some practical ideas, I've put together a small set of kind of exercises and connected to the ideas from today's talk. There are simple exercises designed to help your teams create better conversations, surface assumptions earlier, and build shared understanding before silos harden. They're intentionally lightweight. There's no big transformation programs, no complex facilitation. They're just quick, practical ways for you guys to create more contribution in your teams, less passive consumption, and better thinking across teams as well. So if any of the ideas resonate with you, you can scan that code there, the QR code, or you can go to silos.ju.mp and feel free to connect with me, and happy to take your questions at the end of the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That's actually really, really useful, I think, for the leaders that are watching this webinar. I think there's a lot to take on here to maybe restructure how to start working on the innovation, how to start working on projects from the very, very, very beginning. So thank you so much for that. Very, very good. I would just like to remind our audience that the Q&As are hiding in a more kind of 3 dots section there. So if you would like to ask questions, Martin or John already, and later on Emily as well, please pop in questions in Q&As, which are hiding in more three dots in a circle on, in my case, on the right side of the screen. So we will come back to the Q&As at the end. So I have Emily's presentation here, and I will try to share it now for everybody, and Emily will...
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Yes, I am almost there. Share, and then I think I need to go to the full screen. Well, come on, full screen. Yes. Is that visible for you now, Emily?
Yeah, I can see it perfectly. It's not full screen, but I can still see it. I don't know if there's another option for you. Otherwise, I think we can proceed.
Yeah, there's I think that's how we have it set it up, that you can mainly see the presentation, but there's a little window with the speaker on the side. So when your voice is active, it brings your video feed as well, but only if you think that your connection is yes. And please say yes. Next, and I will flick to the next slide. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And yes, sincere apologies, everybody, for the false start earlier. Martin and John, thank you ever so much for your presentations. They were fantastic. And I hope you don't mind, everybody, but I am going to stay off of video for now, just because it feels a little bit risky. If we go to the next slide, then please. So just an introduction to start with. My name's Emily. I'm a strategy and innovation manager at Cleere. Cleere is a consultancy company with offices in London, where I am, as well as in Dublin and Edinburgh. Our headquarters is in Paris. We have a big presence in the US, Asia, elsewhere too. We do a lot of business transformation work, as well as strategy and growth and innovation across all sectors. I dip into the construction world now and again in this role. I'm currently doing some work with Colas Island, the road construction company, to explore how they can optimize internally and supporting them with that transformation. Also Scottish Water, I worked with them on their net zero agenda and more specifically adoption of low carbon concrete, as they're involved in a lot of water infrastructure. Personally, I'm 12 plus years in strategy and innovation generally now, but in quite a few different contexts. So I previously worked for a venture fund that invested in early stage climate tech startups. I managed an innovation fund at a children's rights NGO. And I've also delivered breakthrough thinking workshops to leadership teams when I was working at Accenture previously. Given the focus of this webinar today is on breaking the silos, I wanted to first of all share with you some stories of where this has been really important to helping our clients solve some pressing problems that they were facing. And then secondly, I'll touch on some aspects of our innovation approach that you can take away and put into practice yourselves. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So the first example I wanted to share with you is related actually to carbon monoxide. Over here, we see about 40 deaths a year from CO poisoning. 400 people are hospitalized each year and 4,000 people attend A&E suspecting they've been poisoned. And this is mostly due to heating or cooking appliances not working properly and leaking out carbon monoxide into the home. These numbers are cited a lot, but really it's the tip of the iceberg. It's an underreported issue, and there's so much that we don't know about carbon monoxide incidents because the data is fragmented and it's inconsistent. So we worked with Cadent to tackle this problem. The first thing we did was pull together the relevant organisations who had data about carbon monoxide cases in the UK. So the gas distribution networks, the London Fire Brigade, the Home Office, we spoke to the NHS as well. And together we created a data platform called Cora. We pulled together this data into one place, and this was the first time for this kind of visibility. It was really unprecedented. And off the back of this, the partners are launching new projects now to tackle the problems that they're able to spot through this new level of visibility of that data. So that's one story I wanted to share. On the next slide, there's a second story. We took a similar approach with Scottish Water in terms of bringing together a load of different organisations that were united by a common goal, but weren't yet really collaborating at all on this. And that common goal was net zero and tackling emissions from concrete. So we pulled together some of the biggest users of concrete across the UK, energy companies, SSE, Scottish Power, as well as the likes of Network Rail and some other companies too. And we pulled these organisations together on the principle that we can achieve more together and with a shared vision to accelerate the availability and adoption of low carbon concrete. We set up this collaboration a couple of years ago. So we were delighted to see Scottish Water lead the way in December. They made an advance market commitment, an AMC, a pledge to buy a set amount of low carbon concrete in the next 5 years. And we were also delighted to see that they had made some public announcements about working with Recyclate and Carbon Cure for trials. Maybe some of you are familiar with these startups. Recyclate is a Scottish startup that transforms waste byproducts from the energy and construction industries, specifically incinerator bottom ash, into a low carbon concrete solution. Carbon Cure's approach to low carbon concrete is different. So they inject captured CO2 into fresh concrete, where it then immediately mineralizes and becomes permanently embedded. So these are just two great examples of where organizations are breaking out of their silos, deciding to collaborate, rallying together around a shared vision, and ultimately having real positive impact in the world. If we move on to the next slide then, in terms of our innovation approach and some practical tips you can apply in your own roles if you don't already, I wanted to shine a light on our outside-in approach, as I think it's one of the most powerful levers for innovation, for a mindset shift internally, for exploring what could be possible and informing strategic choices. Essentially, it's about researching what's going on in the market. What are competitors up to? What are startups doing? What technologies are emerging that might disrupt our business or present opportunities? And just to give you two examples of where we've done this recently with clients. So currently working with Colas Island, we pulled together over 50 case studies of innovation relevant to them, whether to do with road maintenance or materials or internal optimization, several other themes too. Mostly this was desk research, but actually what was really valuable was also going out, engaging and speaking with the startups and with industry bodies. So for example, we spoke with the CEO of Provisio, which is an Irish startup that uses AI software and radar sensors to prevent automotive accidents. So interesting for any company which faces these risks in its operations as one of the most obvious use cases. I spoke with EcoPals as well. I learned about how they're using recycled plastics as asphalt additives in road construction, reducing emissions by 20%. So interesting for companies looking for more circular materials. We then did a similar exercise with another client, Dublin Bus. So we were looking at the wider landscape across Europe. What insights can we glean? What is the art of the possible for what Dublin Bus could do next? So we spoke with EMT Madrid, for example, in Spain. We learned about their trials of autonomous buses, fascinating. We spoke with TMB in Barcelona. We learned about how they used augmented reality to project images onto the bus windows. So really aiming to enhance that tourist experience. So through this exercise, really what you're getting to is a lot of possibilities and inspiration from organizations that are proactively trying new things, whether that's to advance sustainability, to cut costs, to improve customer experience, or drive revenue. So this is innovation tied to real business benefits and a very practical way, a practical exercise to break out of our own silos and really explore what's going on in the wider world around us. So if we move to the next slide then, so this exercise would typically take place towards the start of a project. And so I wanted to share with you a very high level approach to a strategy project that shows the journey that we might go on with clients, depending on their needs, of course, to design a new strategy. And this very much borrows from innovation principles and is equally a relevant approach for whenever companies want to do this kind of work in-house. So over the course of a 10-week project, we might go through these three phases. First of all, engage with a load of internal data, as well as speaking with stakeholders, customers, wider market. We're in this listening and learning mode, and it's that employing of empathy. Martin, you talked about doing this empathy work, and that's very much there in that first phase. Next, we distill all these insights. We consider the so what. What are the various options that these insights point to? What makes sense given today's context and the vision, the level of ambition of the company? And then the third phase is really about making it all really practical so it can be delivered and lead to tangible impact. So it's about this approach of diverging and converging. Again, a shout out for the double diamond process of innovation. Definitely take a look at that and see how you can adopt what is actually quite a structured approach to innovation. And it is fundamentally as well about getting different perspectives in the mix and breaking the silos to really rally colleagues around a shared vision and a roadmap. On to the next slide, and just a note on AI briefly, as it is a massive supercharger of innovation generally, especially if we're defining innovation as solving problems and creating tangible value. At Cleere, we're doing a lot of work in this space. We have a huge AI capability. We're building AI agents that can tackle specific challenges. We have a store of them available to clients, so take a look. We also have some significant AI partnerships, and through these partnerships, we do have access to some funding pots. So if you're keen to explore where AI could make a big difference to your business, please do get in touch, as we may be able to tap into that benefit on your behalf. Regardless, though, of whether we're working with clients to identify opportunities to optimize with AI, or we're crafting a new 5-year strategy, or we're identifying a new growth opportunity, there are some common principles that speak to an innovation mindset and that can help to really proactively break down these silos. So if we just skip to the next slide, I'll just touch on these. This is my final slide, so I'll just touch on these before wrapping up. So 5 principles here. The first is about being outcomes first. This is about figuring out the outcomes that matter most to you. What do you want to achieve ultimately? And then working backwards from that. It means that we don't do things for the sake of it, because we're laser focused on that end goal. Rich insights is about being led by insights, not opinion, and adopting these 2 lenses of outside in, which we touched on before, and inside out. So we have that really holistic picture. Being iterative, it's about regularly testing and validating your conclusions, bringing in feedback from stakeholders, a theme across all of our presentations today, and ultimately shaping something that really resonates. Co-creation is about not doing this in an ivory tower and anchoring any solution on the realities of the people most closely involved. Our default is always collaboration with clients and a sense of one team. And then finally, being practical and action-oriented. Again, another theme that's emerging across the 3 presentations today. A strategy doesn't mean anything if it sits on a shelf as a pretty-looking PowerPoint. A solution doesn't mean anything if it's not implemented, if it's not made real. So how will we make this happen? And I think that's equally, if not more, important. So thank you ever so much. If we just skip quickly to the next slide. Yeah, that's everything I wanted to share today. Any questions or comments, I'd love to hear, whether that's in the Q&A session we've got up next, or this afternoon, or the coming weeks. Here's my email, so definitely reach out if you want to discuss more. And thank you very much. I'm happy that the slides and the connection held out finally.
Thank you, Emily. That's very good presentation. Thank you. I think that you managed to squeeze so much into those few slides, including case studies and recipe for success, and even touch on AI. So thanks so much. I'll just check if we have any questions.